Okay, we're up to Daf Samach and Beis towards the end of the Amid by Iboilahu. The last, about 10 lines of So the last thing the Gemara had said was that we had a machlokes if an animal sticks its hand out of the womb before the shechita and then pulls its hand back in. So if it sticks its hand out and stays out the whole time, then the shechita is definitely not mater. It's mater the rest of the uber, but it's not mater the part that stuck out. The shaila is, if it stuck its hand out and then came back in, is the shechita then mater the part that came back in? So the machlokes Rav and Shmuel and Rav Yochanan. The Gemara says, I have a question. According to Rav Yochanan, this is the Rashi's mahal. According to Rav Yochanan, that when you stick your hand out and stick it back in, it fixes it. Here's the question. So the fetus sticks his hand out, sticks it back in, so we said it's fine. And then it sticks its other hand out, and then its other hand out, and its other leg, and its other leg, and bekitzer, it keeps on doing this outside of the head, obviously, but it does this till roiv of the body has been out and in. Does that make a difference? Do we say that because the roiv of the body was out and in, now it's already considered as if it was born, and the shechita is not mater the over? Do you say no? Each time it goes out, it's sort of like etch-a-sketch. It goes back in, it's erased. Do we say, well, at the end of the day, accumulatively, the roiv of the body left, so it's considered as if it was born, and the shechita is not mater the baby. Dilma, even the hada. You say each time, since it comes back, it's restarted. That's the question. And imtim tziloy ma'kivan the hada. And if you argue that because it came back in, it's already back. So haitzi ubes yade v'chadcha. What another shayla? Animal sticks its hand out, and you cut off the hand. Now it doesn't cause it a treifa to the hand to be cut off. You cut off the hand. Another hand cut off. Another hand cut off. Meaning you keep on doing this until roiv of the body, from a size-wise, roiv of the body has been cut. Now there's only a miyut inside the body. So the question is, does the shechita matter the miyut? Normally the shechita is matter the uber as well. On the other hand, since roiv has left, not at one time, and roiv has been cut off, do we say that the shechita is no longer matter the miyut that's inside? So if, let's say, 45% of the uber is still inside the womb, do we say that the shechita is matter the 45% or not? Do we say at the end of the day roiv has left and roiv is cut off, therefore the shechita is not matter roiv, the miyat? Or do you say no, because the roiv did not leave at one time, the miyat is still part of the mother and it's included in the shechita? So Tashema, so try to bring a raya that the shechita is mater the miyat even in the situation, because it said in the Mishnah zehaklal davar shebegufa aser she'ena gufa muter. The Mishnah said the rule is that the shechita is mater whatever is inside from the baby. Zehaklal. The question is, what is zehaklal adding? She'en gufa asuyemai lava usibek hagabna. Is it not referring to this case that the shechita of the mother is mater the baby? And the chiddush is zehaklal lasuye this, that even if roiv of the body has left in parts and been cut off, the miyat is still mutter based on the shechita. So Gemara says, "Loi, no, perhaps that's not what the Mishnah is referring to at all." So what is the Mishnah referring to? So you call it in my para. We had this yesterday. The case is we have a cow, and inside the cow it has a baby cow, which is normally mutter by the shechita of the mother, as long as the baby cow was not birthed before the shechita. But the baby cow only has one hoof. The hooves are not split. So we said that Shimon's shita is that once that baby is birthed, it's a problem, even though it's technically a cow, but it doesn't have split hooves. But the shechita of the mother is mater, and that's what the Mishnah is referring to. When it says that the shechita of the mother is mater, zehaklal, it's not referring to this case. It's referring to the case of a kolut b'may para. But we don't know what the halacha would be in the case where Aver left and you cut it off, Aver left, you cut it off, that we actually was never addressed by the Mishnah. The Gemara says, La suye kol my para, aliba de Rav Shimon, the afagav dam Rav Shimon kol my para. Aser, hani mil hechti asav ha'olam, ayi my shari. Okay, weiter. Today's daf, not only is it challenging, it's a lot. That was like sugya number 1. Sugya number 2. Boy Rav Chinana, haitzi uber es yadai ba'azara. So we said that if an uber sticks its hand out, it's not included in the shechita of the mother. Why? The part that left. Because he said, Basar basada treifalo sechelu, that once the basar leaves its area, and the area in this case is the womb, and it's a treifa. It's not included in the shechita. Here's the question: you have a carbon that the hand was stuck out inside the Beis Hamikdash, and then you shechted with the hand sticking out. The question is the part of the hand? So you have a carbon, and it's pregnant, and before you shech the carbon, its hand stuck out, but it's all inside the Beis Hamikdash, and then you shechted with the hand sticking out. So what's the question? Do we say that the hand sticking out, so it's not included, it's outside of where it's supposed to be? Where it's supposed to be is the womb. On the other hand, you could argue that when it comes to karbanos, the location of a carbon is the Beis Hamikdash, and the hand is within that. So the question is, what is that location of the carbon? Is it the mother's womb, and it's out of that, so it's basa basada trefa zechelu? Or do you say by karbanos? No. Karbanos, they have a different barometer. They have the Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara says, do we say that the walls of the Azara is the area for karbanos hanami legabi hai? So it's considered the location of the baby, and therefore the baby is not outside of its location. It's not basar basada trefa. It's not basada. By Dilma, legabi hai lav mechitza. The mechitza is over imay. Or do you say no? A baby's location is the mother's womb, and it's outside the mother's womb. That's the Gemara's question. So the Gemara says, "I'll tell you what. I have a different nafkamina. That for whatever reason the Gemara feels this nafkamina is more obvious, that it's more answerable. I'll give you another nafkamina. Kachim kalim, like a shlomim, bechor, meiser, they have to be eaten in Yerushalayim, right? The shecht and the Beis Hamikdash, but they have to be eaten in Yerushalayim. What if you have kachim kalim, mother's pregnant, the baby sticks his hand out and pulls it back in, and you follow the shita of Rav and Shmuel that sticking the hand out and back in is a problem. The hand is going to be awesome. But they did in Yerushalayim. So once you have the same question, do we say that it left the mother's mechitzas and therefore it's basar basada? Or do you say, no, kachim kalim are meant to be in Yerushalayim and its hand was stuck out, but it's within the walls of Yerushalayim? For some reason the Gemara says that's obviously a ridiculous question. Why? Because I don't care about Yerushalayim. I care about the mother's womb. That's the basada. So the Gemara says so too in this case, which is kachim in the Beis Hamikdash, even though it stuck its hand out inside the Azara, it's outside of the mother's womb. So you see from the sugya that the sada, the area the baby is supposed to be, is in the mother's womb. For kachim in the Beis Hamikdash, kachikalim in Yerushalayim, it's irrelevant. The womb is the place, and if it leaves the womb, it'll be considered basar basada. Amrli Abaye v'tiboylach kachikalim Yerushalayim. Kachikalim Yerushalayim my time lekam boyle. Why aren't you bothered by the kachikalim case? The mechitzas over imayu, because it's clear to you that the area of the baby is supposed to be in the mother's womb, and not Yerushalayim. And when it sticks out its hand outside of the womb, it's considered chutz l'mechitza. So chanami mechitzas over imayu. So that answers your case about kachim in the Beis Hamikdash. Sugi number 2. Sugi number 3. Boy ilfa hoitzi ubers yada ben simin l'simin. So like this: if a baby sticks his hand out, we said yesterday that you can't eat the part and it's out for the shechita. So the shechita is not mater. Shechita is not mater, but it's not considered a nevela. We had this yesterday. It's not considered a nevela. The chacham, it was a machlokes tanaim. The chacham said it's a treifa, meaning it's not metame. Now, you have to understand, shechita does two things. It's mater the animal in achila, and it also removes the iser nevela, the tumah nevela. Here's the question. You have a baby inside the mother's womb. There's 2 simanim. And when you cut the first siman, that first siman accomplishes 2 things. It's mater the baby in achila, and it also removes the tumas nevela of the baby. Then the baby sticks his hand out. Now, when the second it sticks his hand out, that second siman, vis-a-vis the hand, is no longer going to be mater in achila. The question is, can that second siman at least still function to remove tumas nevela? In other words, would the hand be matame? The Gemara says, "Haitzi ubers yada ben sim l'simin." Mahu. What is the halacha regarding the tumah of the second hand? Meaning, if it was out the whole time, then we say it's obvious there's no tumas nevela, because basically, both simonim usually have to do the same thing. The average shchita, both simonim are doing the same thing in that they're accomplishing two things: removing tumas nevela and matar achila. If the hand was out the whole time, then both simonim vis-a-vis the hand are doing the same thing, which is not matar achila, but removing tumas nevela. Over here, the hand left between siman l'siman. So the question is, the first siman was trying to accomplish two things vis-a-vis the hand: matar nevela and matar achila. The second one, but by the time it got to the second siman, the hand's already out. So it's not matar achila anymore. The question is, do we say, well, then it's not doing anything? Or no, it should at least still accomplish to remove the tumas nevela of the hand. So the Gemara says, "Hoitzi ubas yodam in siman l'siman mahu mi mitzdarif siman l'risha in l'sheini l'tar b'dei nevela loy." So the Gemara answers, in this case, there's no tumas nevela. Why? Because these simonim, forget about the hand. The rest of the body of the animal is motor b'achila. That means that the first siman and the second siman are combining together to be matar achila. So if the first siman and the second siman are combining together to be matar the rest of the uber, then for the hand, they'll at least be mitzdarif, they'll combine together to remove tumas nevela. Meaning we're not going to separate one siman to the next regarding the hand because we're combining them regarding the rest of the uber. The rest of the uber you could eat because it had both simonim. So the fact that the both simonim are mitzdarif for achila of the rest of the uber means that it's mitzdarif to remove tumah of the hand. Amar Rava, kava chaymer, imhoyel loy siman rishon l'siman shein latir b'achila, lo yoyel loy l'tar medei nevela. Okay, sugya number 4. By Rav Yirmiyah, ma'u lachash l'zareh. Now Rav Yirmiyah asked this question. Now this is a very open-ended question, which is going to take us into the beginning of the, still on this Amid, my goodness. Kasha is, if you have an animal that stuck its hand out from the womb before the shechita, so we know that the rest of that animal could be eaten, the baby could be eaten except for the hand. What if that baby then had other babies? So you have baby cow A, stuck its hand out, so the hand is aseh, but the rest of the uber is mutter, and then that baby had another baby. So that baby had a second baby. The question is, what is the status of the second baby? Now the Gemara is going to try to figure out what exactly is the question. In other words, you have a mommy cow. It was originally a baby. It was a fetus, but it stuck its hand out, and then it grew up to an adulthood. That's called a ben pekua. That baby is, now it gets older, is ben pekua. You're allowed to eat that cow without shechita, because it already had the shechita when it was in the mother's womb. But its hand is still aser. So the question is, as it gets older, so you have basically a cow that has an aser hand. The question is, what is its status regarding its children? Now the Gemara wants to know exactly what are you asking. The Gemara says, Heichi dami, well, what is the case? So, again, we're going to call the ben pekua is the baby that was in the mother's womb that stuck its hand out. So you have a ben pekua. The ben pekua gets older and has another baby. Now the ben pekua is, let's say, the male. Who did the male mate with? Now, if the male ben pekua had a baby with a regular female cow, and what are you asking? You're asking about the fact that it had an aser hand. So does it give its baby an aser hand as well? I don't understand exactly the question, because if the case is a ben pekua mating with a regular female cow, we have a much bigger problem. The halacha is that if a ben pekua mates with a female cow, that baby cow that they have cannot be eaten. I'll tell you why. Ben pekua does not need shechita. So the dad doesn't need shechita. The mom does. You'll say, okay, I have a baby. What's the status of the baby? So you'll say, well, it's half from a man the dad that doesn't need shechita, half from mom that does need shechita. Here's the problem. You can't eat that baby cow. Why? You'll say, well, because maybe it's really an extension of the father and it doesn't need shechita at all. Okay, but maybe it's an extension of the mother and it needs shechita. So you'll say, well, just shecht it. I'll tell you why. If it's chatzi, that means that we look at two of the simanim. We look at one, if it doesn't need shechita, as if the siman is already cut, and therefore it's like a cow that's already half shechted already, so you can't shecht it any further. It's sort of like one of the simanim is already pre-cut, and then you can't just cut the other one. So you're asking about, again, you have a ben pekua that has a hand that's stuck out, so the hand is aser. And we wanted to know how does that affect the baby. So it's child. So the Gemara says, well, it depends who it mated with. If it mated with a regular cow, you can't eat the child anyway. Forget about the hand. because it's a ben pekua dad and non-ben pekua mother is going to asa the baby. The Gemara says, "Ilay medazal beim malaisa my area hidis be isa yoitza I feel ben pekua da almanami dam resharshia l'diver ami choshen l'zeraav ben pekua bal behim malaisa avladi in lotakana." So forget about the hand. You can't eat the baby b'chlal. So the Gemara says, "Okay, you're right. The case is where the ben pekua dad mated with a ben pekua mom." So the child doesn't need shchita at all, because its mom doesn't need shchita, its dad doesn't need shchita. The only question is, does the isser of its hand extend? Does it extend the isser of its hand to its child? So the Gemara says, I'm going to be here. So the Gemara says, and that's what we're dealing with now. In today's stuff. So the Gemara says, the case is where the ben pekua dad had mated with a ben pekua mom. So now the question is, does its isser hand give over to its child? Does the child of that, is the child of that not able to have, are you able to eat the child's hand as well? Aver moiled aver, v'chatich le'eveshari. Do we say that the father had an usser hand? So that means the baby also has an usser hand, just cut off the baby's hand and you're fine. Idilma mivalvul zare, or do you say no? Because the father had an usser hand, it makes the entire child usser. It doesn't just go like, meaning we're assuming that the father's hand being usser will affect its child. It will make the child's hand also be usser. So at first we're like, okay, does that mean just cut off the child's hand or no? It spreads. So says the Gemara, Hadar Amar, then he responded, Pshita de mivalvul zare. Of course it can't just be usser hand makes child's usser hand. I'll tell you why. If it was that, if it was that scientific, that hand equals hand, that it's not DNA, then you would have blind cows would have blind babies. It doesn't work like that. The answer is the father's DNA spreads forth the entire animal. So to the usher hand would affect the entire child. Dim kain suma yoylid suma, vikita yoylid kita. El pshita de mevalvel zare. It must be the father's seed goes mingled throughout the entire thing. So here's the essential question. The essential question is like this. The father having an usher hand, does that make the child entirely usher? So here's the way, you can look at it one of two ways. You can look at it as, well, the child is being formed by a father that has isser in him. So yeah, the isser is now in the child and it's spread forth and it makes the entire child usher. Or, let me ask you a question. Every time a parent, a healthy cow, forget about a stomach cow, has a child, right? Is the father usher? Well, you'll say, well, the father is made up of dam, which is usher. It's made up of chaylev, which is usher, and then it's made up of meat, which is not usher. Every father has isser in it, and yet it's able to make a non-isser child. What's the difference between, meaning in other words, do you look at it as, well, the father has an usher hand, it's a kosher animal, but an usher hand, and then it has a child, does that isser hand, tumah, like isser, DNA, spread throughout the entire child? You could look at it one of two ways. You could say yes. Or you could say, well, every father has Isser also because it's got Chaylev and Dam. And we don't say that affects the child entirely. So it must be that the Torah says that even though the father is Isser, it doesn't spread Isser to the child. So too, you have Chaylev and Dam of the father, and that doesn't affect the child. So now you have Chaylev, Dam, and an Isser hand. Or do you say no? The Torah only accepts Chaylev and Dam, but it doesn't accept it at a third Isser. Says the Gemara, Hachi Kambaili, this is the question. Behema ba'alma lav mikaya chayil v'dam ba'asi v'sharya. Every behema has chayil v'dam in it, and yet it creates a permitted child. Hachanami, sot over here, lishna. Sot over here, the father has chayil v'dam, and it is her hand. And it should make a mutter child. Idilma, trei yisir amriya, tlasal amrina. Or perhaps no. We're only comfortable with the concept of chayil v'dam because that's a mitzias where two isurim, it can make a mutter child. But chaylev dam and an isser hand, no. That's the question. So the Gemara says, well, so you're basically asking, you have a ben pekua, every animal, but every ben pekua has chaylev and dam, and mates with another ben pekua that has chaylev and dam, and yet they make a child that's mutter. What about the fact that it has chaylev and dam? The answer is, so what? The chaylev and dam makes chaylev and dam, but who cares? It doesn't make an isser. So we should say the same thing by chaylev and dam and an isser hand. You say no, isser hand is too much. So the Gemara just speaks it out. The Gemara says, who is this question according to? Rav Meir's Shita is that if you have a ben pekua that mates with another ben pekua, the child actually needs shchita. So he can't be the one you're addressing, because we're going with a premise that the mommy is a ben pekua, the daddy's a ben pekua, the child is a ben pekua, doesn't need shchita at all. The only question is, over here it has an isser hand. So the Gemara just speaks it out. Ulaman, Ilu Rameir, it can't be, this question cannot be posed according to Rameir. Why? Because Isser Chela V'dam Ika, the Isser Yaitze Leka. Rameir does not believe that a Ben Pekua that mates with another Ben Pekua, the child doesn't need Shechita. He actually holds a need Shechita. So his whole question doesn't start according to Rameir. It must be Rabbi Yehuda. The problem is Rabbi Yehuda's Shita is that a Ben Pekua, you can actually eat the Chelav and the Dam of it as well. Rabbi Yehuda's Shita is that a Ben Pekua, it's not just that you could eat it without Shechita. You could eat the Chelav and Dam as well. So your whole question is based on the premise like this. You have a Ben Pekua mates with another Ben Pekua, has a child. So the Gemara says you could eat the child without Shechita, not Rameir. The only issue is, what about the fact that the animal had an Isser hand? So you'll say, well, what's the question based on? The question is based on the fact that Chelav and Dam it has, and the other animal has Isser Chelav and Dam, and yet that doesn't affect the child. The question is, do we add an Isser hand as well? That's assuming the Chelav and Dam is a problem. Rav Yehuda's Shita is that there is no Isser Chelav and Dam by a Ben Pekua. So who is this question like? It can't be Rameir and it can't be Rav Yehuda. The Gemara says, Isser Chelav and Dam Leka, Titania. Isser Chelav Leka, at least I think Chelav Leka. Titania, Gira Nosha Noisim B'Shlil V'Chel V'Yaser De Rameir. Rav Yehuda Omer, Ein Noig B'Shlil V'Chel V'Muter. Rav Yehuda's Shita is that there is no Isser Chelav on a Ben Pekua. So the Gemara says, Elakol Mikoyach Le'amrinon Deshari. Rather, it must be that this entire question is not what we thought. We thought the case is we have a Ben Pekua that stuck its hand out, so it's Aser. The question is, how does it affect the child? The answer is it's Pashit. The child will not become Aser because the father has an Aser hand. The same way that there's no Isser of Chelev that's extended to the son, so to the Isser hand as well. The Gemara says, Kol Koychai Le'amrinon Deshari. Here's the question. The question is not about the child. The question is Stam. You have a Ben Pekua, a female Ben Pekua. So you have a female fetus that stuck its hand out. So the hand is Aser. The question is, can you drink the milk of that fetus as it gets older? What's the question? Do we say that the milk is coming from the hand as well? Meaning the milk comes from the entire behema, including the hand, and the hand will affect its milk from a kashrus perspective? You say no. Milk always stam. Why are you ever allowed to drink milk? It's l'chor, it's Eva Menachai. The answer is the Torah is matter milk. So maybe the Torah is matter milk, even when there's an Isser hand. So it's not a question affecting the child, it's affecting the Ben Pekua itself. Does the Isser hand aser its own milk? The Gemara says, Ma'u l'gemayas chalvoi. Chalav da'alma loy ke'ever ben achai dami v'sharya. Hanami l'shna idilma hasa mislita kantali sur b'shchita hachalesa kanta b'sur b'shchita. Do you say over here, because you can't shecht it, therefore it's not like other cows, and we don't just matter the milk. Teiku, that's a question that's going to stay unresolved. Okay, moving right along. Let's go weiter. So the Gemara says, maybe we'll get to the Mishnah. Maybe we'll stop at the Mishnah today because it's a very, very long daf. The Gemara says like this. We'll see. Okay, the Mishnah had said that if you were to go into the womb of the animal and cut part of the child while the animal is still pregnant and leave part of the child in there, and then you shech the mother's shchita is mater the uber, including the dismembered parts of the uber. But if you cut the animal itself and leave parts of the animal itself, the shchita is not mater. So the Gemara says, Minolan, how do I know that the shchita of the mother is mater, even dismembered parts of the uber? The Chsib, V'chol behema mafresas parsa. The pasuk says, V'chol behema mafresas parsa. The lashon of the pasuk is, Mailas gera bibehema. The V'chol behema mafresas parsa, bibehema. Bibehema means inside. It implies behema bibehema l'ramas avlad. That the vlad, which is called a behema in and of itself, is a behema bibehema. That the baby is a behema bibehema in another behema. And the Torah is matir the vlad, even all parts of it. So the vlad is considered a behema bibehema. So says the Gemara, wait a minute. If you're telling me that the vlad is called a behema, alama tnan, so yamiru boy, then you should be able to do tzmura with a fetus. Let's say you have tzmura is we have a carbon A, and you want to transfer the holiness onto a Chullin animal. You're not allowed to min Torah, but there's a penalty. Both become kaddish. Let's say you have a carbon, and you want to try to transfer the holiness of the carbon onto a fetus. The halacha doesn't work. Why? Because the fetus is not called a behema. But now you're telling me that it's called a behema because it's behema bibehema. So why doesn't tzmura apply? Aloma Tanani, yet the Mishnah says, Ein Mamirin. Lo Evarim Be'emurim. You're not able to do Tumura with limbs for fetuses, meaning you can't say the limb of this carbon should kaddish onto a fetus, V'lo Evarim, or vice versa, V'lo Evarim V'urim B'mishleimin, V'lo B'shleimin B'hen. And you can't transfer the holiness of a carbon onto a fetus b'fnei asma. Why? Because it's not called a behema. But why? I thought you just got finished telling me that it's behema b'behema is referring to the fetus. So the Gemara says you're right. The source is not behema b'behema because the fetus is not called a behema in halacha because then its tzmura would apply. El Omar Kra v'chol behema l'rabas esavlad. The source is v'chol behema. V'chol is to include any part of the behema, even the vlad itself. The Gemara says, Ihachi, wait a minute. See, if you're telling me v'chol behema is to include every part of the behema, what's inside the behema, including dismembered parts of the vlad, that they're included in the shechita, so says the Gemara, then v'chol behema, if that's the case, then the second case, what's the case in the Mishnah? Let's say there's no fetus. You stam cut, you have surgery on a behema, and you cut part of its kidney, and you leave the kidney inside. The halacha is the shechita is not matter. Why? Because it's not, I guess it's not part of behema anymore. But wait a minute, if you're telling me v'chol behema means that the shechita is matter, every part of the behema, including the fetus that's sitting inside, even if it's dismembered, then shouldn't it also be matter if there's a part of the behema that got cut off, that you had surgery, that you left inside, should also be mutter. So says the Gemara says, Ihachi, afilu chitach min atchul min akloyes nami, Alama Tanan, yet the Mishnah says, Choytich min ha'ober shemaya muter b'achila, min ha'tchula min ha'kloyes asa b'achila. So what's the source? In other words, you have a pasuk, you're making a distinction between cutting part of the fetus and leaving it in the mother, where the shechita is matter, because it's v'chol behema, but not cutting part of the animal itself and leaving it there. That's not muter. That's ev menachai, because that's not v'chol. What's the difference? The Gemara says, Amakra osa shlema v'chasar. Osa means that the shechita is only matter the behema. Hold on one second. So in other words, what's the difference? So the Gemara says, in other words, you have two halachas. If you cut into the mother and cut part of the mother and leave it in the animal when you shecht it, it's not matter, it's ev menachai. But if you cut part of the fetus and leave it in the mother, then it is mutter. So why? Because he said v'chol l'rabas the behema's child. So what about the behema itself? That's osa. Osa excludes part of the behema. El me'ata, wait a minute. So you're telling me osa means shlema v'chasra. Okay? Another question. You said v'chol means that the mother shechita is matter the fetus in all forms. V'chol. Any form of the fetus, even dismembered. Here's the question. What if you shecht a cow and inside the cow you find a fetus, but the fetus looks like a different, it looks like a bird. It doesn't look like a cow. The halacha is you're not allowed to eat the child because it doesn't look like a cow. But why? The chol should be marba any form of the fetus, dismembered or even if it looks like a different species. El me'ata sheiches behema matzah dus yaina tishteri. Alam Rav Yochanan didn't Rav Yochanan say sheiches behema matzah dus yaina asur b'achila. Didn't Rav Yochanan say that if you shecht a behema and you find some sort of fetus inside that looks like a bird, it's not mutter. Go to the next page. So why is that not mutter? I thought the chol is matter the fetus in all forms. The answer is be'ina prusas v'leka. You need to have hooves. You need to have split hooves. Says Gemara, wait a minute. I thought we said before that if it has one hoof that's not split, it's mutter as long as you found inside the fetus. So the Gemara is going to say it needs at least one hoof. Parsa. It can't look like a bird. It doesn't have to have split hoofs, but it needs to have some hoof to be considered a fetus. The Gemara says, El me'ata kolut b'mai para litzeri hatan b'Revi Shmuel krivshim b'yachai parsa b'mehema techelu. It needs one hoof. It doesn't have to have split hoofs, but it needs to have at least one hoof. Okay. Yeah, we're going to go to the Mishnah and then we'll stop because it's just too long of a daf today. Rav Shimi Barashi Omar, he has a different pshat. Before we said that what's the heter that if you cut the fetus that and you leave it inside the behema, the shechita of the mother is matter the dismembered part of the fetus. We originally said it's behema bibehema, that the behema bibehema is a reference to the fetus. We said, wait a minute, if the fetus is called a behema, then why isn't there tzmura? We said there's no tzmura because it's not a behemoth, but now you tell me it is a behemoth. The fetus is considered a behemoth, then it should have the laws of tzmura. So the Gemara says, Rav Shim Barashi Amar Kida Amr Mei Kara. The truth is, really, the source of the fetus is behemoth. If that's the case, then why is there no tzmura? The kashalach em amirin. The Gemara answers, Hamani Rav Shimon. The answer is it follows Rav Shimon that really it should have tzmura. But it's exeris hakasiv that there's no tzmura on a fetus, not because it's not called a behemoth. Right? We said that there's no tzmura by a fetus. We thought it was because it's not called a behemoth. It's not true. There's no tzmura by a fetus It's Gzeres HaKosiv. What's the Gzeres HaKosiv? The Makish Tmura LaMeiser, that there's a connection between Tmura and Meiser. Ma Meiser in Anoig Bevarm Bemurim, just like, and Rav Shimon is the author of this, that just like there's no Meiser Behema on fetuses, because the Meiser has to walk through the flock, marking each one, and the 10th one is Meiser Behema. Obviously, it can't apply to fetus. Just like there's a fetus is not included in Meiser Behema, so too it's not included in Tmura. Now, so the Gemara answers that really a fetus is called a behema. So it could be the heter of the shechita of being matzah, the dismembered part of the fetus is called behema bibehema. If it's a behema, then why doesn't the laws of Tmura apply? The Gemara says because it's a Gzeres HaKosiv from Rav Shimon that the laws of Tmura do not apply by a fetus because it's compared to meiser. Now, where is this Rav Shimon? The truth is, Rav Shimon never actually said this. This is very out there of how they got this, the presumption of where they got this from. It's from the following conversation. Uminot Timra. How do I know that Rav Shimon held this way? Ditnan. The Mishnah says like this. Now, the Mishnah says that this is the continuation from the Mishnah we had before by Tmura. The Mishnah had said that, again, Tmura does not apply to fetuses. And then the next case, Rav Yossi said as follows. Amar Rav Yossi. Rav Yossi says as follows. Haloi b'mukdashim. Yeah. Rav Yossi's opinion is that you could apply Tmura to fetuses. So he's obviously, again, we're trying to figure out, the one who says you cannot apply Tmura to fetuses is, now we're saying it's Rav Shimon, because it's compared to a Meiser Behema. Okay. How do I know this? So now, because the next case in the Mishnah was Rav Yossi. Rav Yossi said, I disagree. Now, Rav Yossi is talking to someone. Now, who is he talking to? We're going to assume Rav Shimon. Because we have that first line in the Mishnah that's no name, that there's no Tzmura by a fetus, we're saying it's Rav Shimon. Because the next line in the Mishnah says, Omer Rav Yossi says, Halo b'mikdashin, when it comes to karbanos, ha'omer ragla shel zu ola. Let's say a person says to a karban, instead of saying this animal is an ola, you say that leg of the animal is an ola. What's the halacha? Kula ola. The entire animal becomes an ola, says Rav Yossi. And Rav Yossi saying, you agree with me. Okay. So, af kishiomer ragla shazu tachazu, take kula tmura tachtel. So says Rav Yossi, if, right, the first Tanakama, the no-name Tanakama said that a fetus or a leg of an animal cannot do tmura. Rav Yossi said, but I don't understand. If when you're makdish a leg of a karban, the entire animal becomes holy because the holiness spreads, so why can't I make a tmura with a leg? That was Rav Yossi's argument. Now, who's Rav Yossi talking to? Says the Gemara, Laman kamahadele, meaning Rav Yossi is implying that the first Tana, at least, right, he's arguing about the tmura part, but he agrees that the kedusha of the leg would spread. Who's he talking to? So the Gemara says, well, Stam Mishnah is usually Rameir. Ilem Rameir for Rav Yehuda, that can't be. Miasle Haisvar, but there's another Brisa, the Tanya. The Brisa says, Yachal Omer Ragel Shazu Ola Te Kula Ola. Tamul Omer Kol Asher Yitib Mimenu Lashem Yeh Kodesh. Mimenu Kodesh Vel Kula Kodesh. Meir and Rav Yehuda's shita is that if you're makdish a leg of an animal, the entire animal is not holy. Not like Rav Yossi said. Rav Yossi said to this Tana, this no-name Tana, you agree with if you're makdish a leg, the entire animal comes holy. You agree with me. So to Tzmura. Who's he talking to? It can't be Rameir and Rav Yehuda, because Rameir and Rav Yehuda's shita throughout Shas is that if you're makdish a leg of an ola, the entire animal does not become holy. It does not spread. What do you do with that leg? So the Gemara says, Yachal Teitzi l'chulin, Tamal Yiyah. The leg itself remains holy, but not the rest of the animal. So what do you do with a holy leg? So you sell that animal to a person who needs a carbon. They'll use that carbon as the entire animal as a carbon, and the money, you figure out the value of the leg, and that value of the leg is holy money. The rest is not. That's from Rav Yehuda's shita. But who is the one who disagrees? Rav Yossi and Rav Shimon. They say kuloi oila. Tamalami l'Rabbah says kula. So now here's the raya. We're saying that this Mishnah that says that a tzmura cannot be affected by the uber is not because it's not called a behema. It's really because it follows the sheet of it's authored by Rav Shimon, and he says it's Gzeres HaKosiv that a tzmura is compared to a meiser. How do I know that this Mishnah is authored by Rav Shimon? It's no name. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you the next line. What's the next line? Rav Yossi said to this no-name Tana, you're saying that there's no tzmura by fetuses or by legs? By a leg of a hema. But you agree with me that if you're makdis like a behema, the entire behema becomes holy. So, right, you should agree with me on that. So you should agree with me that Tamura applies as well. Who's the one who agrees with him throughout Shas in that Nakuda? It's Rav Shimon. So it must be he's talking to Rav Shimon. So you see that our Mishnah follows Rav Shimon, and therefore really a Vlad is called a behema, and that's why it's behema bibehema, but there's no Tamura because it's compared to Meiser. So the Gemara says, Laman, Il Reb Meir of Yehuda, Misla Hasvara, El Reb Shimon. So the Gemara says, Loi. The truth is he's not talking to Rav Shimon. It doesn't mean that the Tana is Rav Shimon as well. It could be the Tana is Reb Meir and Rav Yehuda. I thought Reb Meir and Rav Yehuda don't agree with him. He's saying, you should agree with me on both counts. Meaning, it's not that Rav Yossi is saying, you should agree with me, you agree with me by one, you should agree with me on the second count. Because the only one who agrees with him on the first count is Rav Shimon. He's saying, no, you should agree with me on both counts. He's talking to Reb Meir and Rav Yehuda. It's not a raya that our Mishnah follows Rav Shimon. It's not a raya that behema is a l'rabas uber. And it's not a raya that it's excluded because it's compared to Maisa behema. No rayas at all. It could be he's talking to Reb Meir and Rav Yehuda. And he's saying that you should agree with me on both counts. Rav Yossi, time of the nafshe kamar. So we're going to end it with that. It's unresolved. All right, we'll stop here.